Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our live webinar today. So the topic of the webinar today is exploring efficient design, and it is hosted by our friends at Property Guru Asia Real Estate Summit, the tech and thought leadership platform of Property Guru, Southeast Asia's leading property technology company, which also organizes the industry-leading Asia Property Award Series. Our panel today comprises experts from leading global architecture and design firms, namely Pomeroy Studio, Spark Architects, and PLP Architecture, who will discuss sustainable innovations that will define this design standards in and beyond Asia moving forward. So maybe I should introduce myself. My name is Andrew Rao. I am going to be a moderator for today. I am the Regional Managing Director for 8 Inc. We are a strategic design consultancy. That was founded 32 years ago out of San Francisco. We're most known for the work we did do and continue to do for Apple. We were the design firm principally responsible for the Apple retail program, the Apple stores. So I'm not going to hop on too much about myself. I mean, obviously here to listen to the expert speakers we have here today. So just before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you do have any questions during the presentation, which is scheduled for the first portion of this webinar, please feel free to type them into the question box in your chat. And towards the second half of our webinar session, there will be a Q&A session where the speakers will discuss and tackle some of these questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. So joining me today is Professor Jason Pomeroy, who is the founder of Pomeroy Studio and Pomeroy Academy. You may have seen him on television hosting Smart Cities 2.0. Following Jason's portion, we'll be joined by Wenhui Lim, who is a partner at Spark Architects. Wenhui is passionate about regeneration, and she's also the chairperson of the Property Guru Asia Property Awards. And lastly, but not least, we have Ron Bakker, who is dialing in from Amsterdam. The founding partner of PLP Architects, and who is the designer of the Edge, which is known as the world's most sustainable and smartest building. So I hope you agree that we have a really interesting lineup of speakers. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jason, who I believe has some slides to take us through. Jason, thank you.
Lovely.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And hello, everybody. Let me share screen. And I guess ultimately this provides a bit of an overview. Let me see if I can actually kind of enlarge screen. Can everybody see that okay? Yay. Okay, so I think we're all kind of very familiar with the fact that half the world's population have been living in city centres since 2007, and that's going to increase to 75% by 2050. And, you know, it's not hard to realise that with this kind of, you know, pandemic era sort of crisis upon us, there is this sort of sense of needing to be moving away from this sense of convergence. If for so many years we've been converging into cities, now we're needing a bit more space. Now, what we need to think about is maybe there is the need to embrace the great outdoors. I mean, even just sort of stepping out of my comfortable confines in Singapore and seeing people sort of commit to the green open spaces, I see a lot more people running around now. And really what we see in this project that we're doing in Singapore is the ability to re-embrace the great outdoors. Lots of social spaces, not just on the ground, but also in the sky. So in the case of Kallang Alive, it's an 89-hectare precinct that is dedicated to sports, recreation and leisure that hopefully will get people active and appreciate the opportunities that open space can provide. Now, talking about space, another sort of prevalent urban challenge is that we're increasingly seeing greater densities within city centres. And currently, world population density is about 51 people per kilometre, which is projected to be 66 people per kilometre by 2050. Now, you're probably thinking, well, how can that be? I mean, that seems incredibly low density. But if you factor in 2/3 of the surface area of the Earth is actually water, that's where these numbers start to make sense. Water is an area that could really be exploited as an alternative means of urbanisation. We see that a lot in Amsterdam, in places like Eiburg, where they have a completely floating community that provides an opportunity for people to be living, working and playing out on water and not necessarily have to pay those high density themes that you often associate with city centres. Now, in that case, we kind of looked at a research project with the University of Venice where we were conceiving complete floating waterborne communities that could be zero energy, and ultimately turn the water into an alternative source of urbanization to try and counteract some of those spatial density issues that we are increasingly facing in high density cities. Now, let's turn to another one of those pillars of issue, one of those other urban challenges, and that relates to the environment. While the world cities account for like 2% of global land area, they account for a staggering 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. So if, for instance, we're consuming 86 billion barrels of oil on a daily basis, which is equivalent to filling 5 pyramids of Giza, that's not necessarily the most sustainable. And increasingly, we need to be thinking about alternative means of energy generation that can sort of safeguard us against our carbon woes. So I would argue that really for the environment, we should be planning for a more carbon negative future. This house that we designed in Singapore is such an example. I mean, it's effectively a power station. It generates more energy than it can consume, and thus the surplus energy can then be provided back into the grid. So start to look at our places of residence or our places of work, and also our communities to be not just self-sustaining, but providing more energy that can sustain the broader community. Now, the fourth issue is related to culture. Culture is being challenged in the wake of assimilation, globalization, and we only have to kind of go into a coffee shop and say, oh, can I grab a Starbucks, as opposed to, can I grab a coffee? So where can we ensure that we still preserve some of the cultural identity and character of the cities and the places and the space that we create, rather than just being sort of, swamped by globalization and the globalization of particular brands? That's something that we explored in the Secretariat building in Yangon, which historically was a beautiful British colonial administration office building that we are preserving to speak about the colonial past, but at the same time provide an awakening of Yangon's future, which is very much becoming a more cosmopolitan society. And we wanted to try and embrace culture and arts as a quintessential part of this new building. So ensure the built environment is adaptable to social and cultural change. Now, the fifth broad issue is relating to the economy. In 2018, the value of the digital economy was $3 trillion and was generated over a 20-year period. And what I find remarkable is that this exceeded 100 years of the Industrial Revolution's economy. So as we shift from manufacturing economies to digital economies, we need to be sure that the spaces and the places that we're creating can actually cater for that change. And that's what we're doing here in the Mediopolis building in Singapore, which is effectively a vertical extrapolation of the workplace that incorporates sky courts and sky gardens as those alternative social spaces for collaboration, meeting, greeting, and working. And then finally, the technological. If we want to continue enjoying life in cities and not live in dysfunctional urban habitats, then we need to be using technology sparingly and also in a resilient fashion. And that's leads us into thinking about technologies that we can be borrowing from different industries to actually help us solve some of those urban challenges through technology. One issue that I think we see in both Abu Dhabi and in Singapore is the huge amount of food that is actually imported. Up to 85% of the food is imported. So why can't we sort of conceive our own vertical vegetable farms that could be creating effectively the rice bowl of Singapore through these floating platforms and plantations, these vertical vegetable farms that effectively can be growing all of the vegetable needs of Singapore. In the case of Abu Dhabi, we calculated that 561,000 kilograms of leafy vegetables could actually be created out of a very small footprint, the size of a footprint of a football pitch, compared to the 4 football pitches that you would normally need to create conventional sort of farming methods. So I hope that kind of gives a few sort of headline points, 6 urban challenges, and I hope that these sort of 6 projects that we've been working on sort of demonstrate some of those responses to them.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason. That was super interesting. I was just scribbling a couple of notes here, and I think your point about density is one that I find really interesting. I think the global population is roughly about 8 billion people, and I'm drawing upon I sat through a presentation with Parag Khanna, and he's the author of The Future is Asian, and he's talking about all these sort of macro trends that are inherent and with us. And what was really interesting, out of that 8 billion global population, 5 billion are sat in this part of the world. So we are really
Yes,
at the heart of the action. So I think eyes are on us for sure.
indeed.
I was also interested to see your point about $3 trillion of economic value was created in 20 years. I wonder, there is a white elephant in the room here, and it is COVID-19. I wonder how much economic value has been destroyed in a mere matter of months. Obviously, there's no data, up-to-date data, to know that reality. But yeah, it is a frightening thing, and I'm sure it's something that we'll bring up and discuss as a group later. And lastly, just the Alice at Mediopolis building. I just wanted to mention that's actually very close to where I live, so I see it on an almost daily basis. So that's your work. Good to know. Thank you, Jason. And now I'd like to pass over to Wen Hui from Spark Architects. Wen Hui, over to you, please.
Hello, everyone. I would like to start by posing the question, why does design need to be efficient? Does the process of art and design need to be? So what needs to be efficient from our perspective is the use of resources, especially finite ones. So we are a big supporter of the ideas behind Retro First, which I'm sure you know, is a campaign by the Architects Journal to prioritize retrofit over demolition and rebuild. Rebuilding, of course, consumes more energy. So renovation, you could argue, is more efficient in terms of the use of resources. So we have been working on a number of projects that transform old buildings into viable economic and community enhancing facilities. So of course, every project has its unique challenges. You can see on the screen here, in the case of Clarke Quay, the client's brief called for an enclosed air-conditioned street. The Spark solution was to place a big canopy over the streets, adopting ideas like Venturi effect, solar shading, physiological cooling to promote outdoor comfort. And of course, this reduces outdoor energy consumption. So moving on to the next slide. Grid in Singapore is one of our Retro First projects under construction. It should achieve TOP next month. Cross fingers. So it's an old typical shopping mall, which will be transformed into a youth-centric education, sports, and retail campus. What we want to do is to increase footfall and value, improve its image to suit new programs and tenants. So in this case, we moved leasable area and mass from the back of the building to the front to create a flagship corner. This transforms the building image, creating a vibrant and youthful street presence. One interesting thing is that earlier this week, I read in The Economist that COVID-19 has led to a pandemic of plastic. This is due to this crazy, huge, but perhaps necessary quantities of PPE masks, visors, gloves, and takeaway food containers, already finding their way into the ocean. We are still using too much plastic, obviously. Next slide, please. A couple of years ago, Spark published an idea to recycle ocean plastic. We used the plastic to form cladding shingles for beach huts with the idea of animating the coast of Singapore and telling a story about upcycling plastic. Now, every year we self-fund a project that provides pertinent solutions for social or environmental issues. We're a member of the Architects Climate Action Network, and in the spirit of the circular economy, that is, reuse rather than discard, the next couple of projects again go back to the notion of retro first. Next slide. So Kiss the Petrol Kiosk Goodbye is a research project. It's similar to Jason's water floating city. considers how to reuse the vast number of petrol stations that might be abandoned as a result of the increase in electric car use. So rather than tearing down the building, we have developed a number of short-term transitional uses that support the circular economy and the local community. So you can see on the screen, for instance, on the left, you have an algae bioplastic 3D printing plant, or you could have a repair coffee shop. In Singapore, we call it the kopitiam, or a second-hand mall. So my last slide is Mumbai Towers in India. This project seeks to rehouse part of the massive slum population in a series of hybrid towers. So already using established local networks of collection and recycling, Tetra Pak cartons are reformed into apartment pods. So Tetra Pak are basically those packet drink containers that's incredibly hard to recycle, which are then, so they are formed into apartment pods and then they are hoisted onto the tower's hybrid skeleton. So the structure uses less concrete and steel, both unsustainable materials, partially replacing them with engineered timber. We believe that engineered timber might be a way forward. It has a great future. President Macron has decreed that all buildings funded by the state must be at least 50% timber. All buildings up to 8 stories for the Paris Olympics in 2024 must be constructed in timber. That's very, very positive news and lots to think about. So thank you, and back to our friendly moderator, Andrew.
Thanks, Wenhui. That was great. Yeah, I mean, your point about I love how you started by posing a provocative question in terms of, you know, does design, should it be efficient? And it reminds me of a conference I was at a couple of years ago, and it was about the sort of intersection of business and design. And in the room at the conference, there were people from the creative design industry and then a lot of sort of business executives. And there was a speaker who said that design thinking, you know, that buzz phrase is a lot, you know, it gets thrown around a lot, and it obviously has helped the creative services have a seat at the table. But what it's done is it's lulled a lot of people to mistake themselves as designers. So, you know, I remember some business person stood up and said, "Oh, we're all designers." And I'm like, well, hang on. And this speaker on the stage, and I think it was at the time he was the CEO of Frog Design, said that designing is a lot more difficult and a lot more time consuming than design thinking. So I think there's definitely need and a recognition that they're not the same thing. And also, I just want to pick up on your point on the plastic pandemic that we're facing in this sort of a COVID era. But I kind of wonder if we look at sort of what the emissions that had been, you know, pre-COVID versus post-COVID, how does plastic stack up against, say, fossil fuels and travel? And I would suspect and imagine, I think I saw some chart where air travel and emissions associated with air travel are greatly outnumbering, you know, say like our plastic takeout containers. So it's all relative, and I think it's all part of a larger discussion that needs to be addressed. And obviously, efficient design through smart, efficient architecture and buildings is obviously a big part of that discussion to be had. So I'm just going to take a quick pause and just remind the audience that should you have any questions, to please share them, and we will tackle them in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Ron Bakker. Ron, please take it away.
There you go. Thank you very much. I like your point about design, and you know, we're sort of living in an increasingly complex world, and many things happening at the same time. We're also all kind of more informed. You know, people have access to so much information that the ones who are interested in thinking about, you know, the future and cities and the planet and things, they'll have so much access to different types of information that it becomes almost a new kind of quality of mankind to be able to combine issues that are really not so logically associated with each other. And we were talking just now about the Edge and the fact that after it was completed 5.5 years ago, and it's still a very popular building. People still want to know about it. And it's not the technology, you know, that keeps people excited for 5.5 years. It's not the fact that it's a very, very sustainable building, all very good things, but it's a combination of everything. And it's quite a, I'm not talking about what I think, but what people have told me. It's a very wonderful place to walk into. It's very bright, and the acoustics are very well resolved. There's an atmosphere of collaboration and discussion, and people actually really kind of like to be in that place, to go to work rather than just going to work. And it strikes me that the combination of all these very different aspects of the built environment and their strong relationship to, you know, the future of our planet and how we deal with pollution and carbon, that is the field that designers can actually operate in. And you're right, Andrew, the idea of design is easier than the practice of it. And being able to discuss on a daily basis aspects of social nature, technological nature, economic nature, cultural nature, you know, spatial nature, and acoustic. You know, if you look at the bubble diagram of things that we do as architects every day, it's quite remarkable. So my feeling is that we have a kind of way of communicating ideas and issues and illustrating connections between things that's very important for how we look at the world in the future, especially in this time of phenomenal innovation where new ideas pop up all the time, and combining them is going to be what makes our cities livable and our planet survive, hopefully, this century. One thing at PLP Architecture that we have been doing is collaborating more and more with people around us. You know, we always work with engineers, we always work with clients and cities, but we've made links with people who touch in great detail one of the aspects of the work that we are doing. And one of the many types of issues, and one of them we've been pursuing for 4 years now, I think, is the idea that one might use wood as a material for building very tall buildings. And this came out of a collaboration with the University of Cambridge, and we worked with structural engineers and with materials engineers and chemists, and we figured that yes, you can build buildings of about 300 meters out of wood. That would be incredibly sustainable. It would make it very easy for projects to be carbon negative rather than adding to the problem. And if you look at timber as something that grows, you know, in almost like a farm, then it's a material that works beautifully. Now, of course, there's in the next slide, there is a very warm feeling associated with wood. Everybody likes wood. You know, if you ask people in the street, do you like steel? They say, not sure what you mean with that question. If you ask, what do you like concrete? They say no. And actually, I don't know anybody who doesn't like a piece of wood. I have to yet find somebody who doesn't like wood as a material, and has many benefits for our concentration. Kids work better in schools that are made out of wood. There's health benefits as well as benefits for the environment and the aesthetics. So next, please. So we've done quite a bunch of study projects with real clients trying to figure out how to make these buildings feasible and financially and technically. And I can tell you it's really, really difficult. It's a new material. It's okay building a shed out of wood 2 or 3 floors is not so hard. But if you go higher and higher, you run into all sorts of issues of structural technologies, of fixings, of bioengineering, of acoustics, and of material science, and that really need lots of testing and lots of trying. And that's what we're going through at the moment. So the best way to do that is to find a project that's real, and that's what we're working on now. Next slide, please. Which is, sorry, that's still a test project. The next one, please. Which is a building in Rotterdam, which has a hybrid structure. It's a mixed-use building just next to the station. It has offices, residential, an event space for TED Talks and jazz music, and many bars and restaurants and some retail at the base. and the building is trying to make vertically a fluent connection of functions, very much related to its very busy location in the center of Rotterdam. And the idea for the structure is to see which material is most suitable for which part of the project and which part of the structure. So sitting next to the station, the next slide please, there's vibrations and noise from the railway. A concrete structure will absorb a lot of the vibrations from the trains, plus it'll allow us to have big spans. And then a timber structure is a better structure for small spans and places where you are perhaps more in touch with the materials around you. So the apartments, the idea is that that's made out of wood. And now, then, you know, this is a real project. So we're looking really at all the regulations and talking to the fire department. And it's very, very hard. But I think in our architectural minds of trying to overlap qualities with sustainability and technology, this is really where we feel very happy. So it's a good place to be. Next, please. And it's the idea of collaboration and this larger discussion that's happening. And we have learned, even in the last 3 months, we have learned better to talk to more people without having to get together, which has been very helpful, and not just in terms of sustainability and pollution in cities, but also in terms of connecting with parts of the world that are not so easy normally to reach. I'm sitting in, it doesn't matter where I sit, I could be in my bedroom. In fact, I'm in a hotel room, it doesn't matter. We are having a good discussion. Some of these aspects that we've learned we should take into the future. We don't have to go to work every day like factory workers, if it's not a factory, but an engineering office. We sort of have understood that now. We're reinventing our world again. So these big disasters are always tough for the world. They bring about lots of innovation at the same time. And we should use the opportunity to figure out how to make this a better place. Thank you very much. Into the future.
Great, thank you very much, Ron. That was fantastic. I love the idea that we moved from carbon neutral to carbon negative, and I know that is a trend we're seeing more and more now. It's not just about not emitting; it's about putting good back into our environment and our community. And the part about wood is really interesting. I just kind of wonder, from a durability point of view, what are the sort of are there any limitations around the sort of integrity and the durability of the material? Does it erode and degrade over time, or are there some treatments that can make it as durable as steel or concrete? I wonder.
Most of the engineered wood and timber that's used in the construction industry is softwood. It grows very quickly, and it's cheap, and it's reassembled into elements that we understand structurally better. And softwood you need to keep inside, don't put it outside. It doesn't do very well in the rain. Bugs love to eat it, and it gets damaged by ultraviolet. And but if you protect wood inside a building or even behind glass, there's no limit to its life. It'll be 100 years, be fine. The structure of that holds the cladding of the dome in St. Paul's Cathedral is several hundred years old, and it's made of local oak wood, and it's sitting there very happily. There's no issues. Same as the bricks and the cast iron that's used in the project.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Ron and Wenhui and Jason, for your comments, your slides, and your presentation. I think it's all been really fascinating and obviously very connected. I just want to maybe add that the business I work for, 8 Inc., is not a pure play architecture business such as yourselves, but we did have sort of roots in interior design and architecture 30 odd years ago out of San Francisco. Over the years, we've sort of added different design capability, and right now, we approach things from a very holistic point of view and much, physical master plan. I'm sure that, obviously you guys are very familiar with that notion, that term. What we would 8Inc would do, and in this sort of age of sort of experience and the focus on experiences, is what is it we want? What is it we want people to think, feel, and do in particular spaces or environments or contexts? So, we believe that before a physical master plan should be drawn up, what we should actually have an experience master plan to really understand how are things, how do we want things to play out in a physical context, in a products and services context, from a behaviors point of view, in terms of the role of people in an environment, and also from a communications point of view. So under that sort of experience realm would fall things like brand design, brand identity, and digital. So looking at things in that sort of interconnected, integrated, and connected manner has really allowed us to tackle some interesting projects. And there are some areas I think we overlap with what you guys do, but I think there's more of a complementary fit. And we partner with architecture firms all the time, and I'd love to follow this conversation on after this session and see if there's stuff we can be doing together. But obviously we're not here to sort of talk about our businesses per se, and obviously I think we've collected quite a few questions from the audience, so I think maybe we can just get cracking and maybe tackle some of these questions. So we've collected a few questions, and we've had a few come up during the course of the speaker's presentation, so I'll just go through and maybe pose a few to our panel here. So first question is from Chris Rudd. That says, great content. I would like to know if colleagues are thinking more radically about repurposing city center infrastructure in the post-COVID age. All Asian cities will have huge overcapacity in, for example, hotel accommodation and probably office accommodation also. What opportunities are there for reimagining city centers? So I'll open it to the panel to see who would like to jump on that and maybe get that a tackle.
Well, I don't mind kicking off from an infrastructure point of view, if that's okay. And I'm just conscious that we've always been hit by some form of pandemic or epidemic over the years. I mean, when you think about the Giudecca in Venice, which was a haven for plague victims or those individuals who are effectively on their last days. When you think about the Spanish influenza, and in particular Spanish influenza in 1918, and the arrival of those individuals who had the disease into Manhattan, actually then shaped early forms of screening. And then even the SARS epidemic that we see in the early 2000s, which provided very early signs of intergovernmental agency working. We've somehow found that these various different viruses in some shape or form have actually shaped the way that we are kind of using the space. What I think now that we see this kind of prophylactic experience where we're having to be coating ourselves in plastic to stay clear of each other and try not to get up close and personal, is going to have an effect on the way that we look at the simple things like the street and the square. I think that the whole idea of creating space is potentially going to be working in the favor of the pedestrian sidewalk. Now, this could actually go hand in hand with the idea of reducing carriageways if we're going for a more car-light environment. If we're trying to advocate for a greener, more sustainable city, which is reducing the impact of the car on the street, a bit like what Barcelona did with the superblocks, which effectively started to remove the cars from the street and pedestrianize environments, then this could actually be meaning greater pedestrianized environments with more space for people to kind of move around and not necessarily get up close and personal when the pandemic is in play. But let's hope and pray that that's not going to be forever. I do still think that we are kind of measuring something like 1 millimeter on a 30 centimeter ruler. And there will be the time where we can actually come together again. And if we are having those public spaces of interaction, social interaction, pedestrianised environment that are just taking the cars off the street, I think that would be a good
Great,
Maybe I
thanks,
can,
Jason. Yeah, please, Ron, go ahead, please.
Maybe I can add to that discussion that from repurposing and sort of reusing space that we have already makes perfect sense from a sustainability perspective, as Wenhui showed us. But one issue that we haven't quite tried enough yet, I think, is the sort of double and triple use of space in cities. You know, there are some great examples. A coffee shop is basically the same as a wine bar, but they operate, you know, different product in different times of the day. Could be the same space. There's no reason why schools wouldn't be used in the weekend for adult education or for theater or culture or even, you know, for people for rave parties at night. Office space is only used for a third of the day, maybe a quarter of the week. It's not enough, you know. If we don't have space and we don't have infrastructure, we don't want to build more than we need to, then we should consider double using space. And you know, in a more digitally organized environment, we can control security better. We can control many things that, you know, that might be obstacles to this double or triple use of space and infrastructure in cities. I think that's one to consider. And I do agree that the public space in the cities is, you know, it's constantly growing. Every city I know has a far more exciting street life now than it had 20 years ago. It's actually very close to our nature to be among other people and look at what they are doing. And, you know, there are some clowns who do things that make us laugh, and there are artists who do things that make us feel better about the world. It's a very normal human activity to get together and exchange ideas, and perhaps it takes a few generations to move from a smaller village agricultural kind of society into the big cities that we live in now. It's quite alienating, that's what people say. But maybe after 3-4 generations, that alienation is wearing off, and we're getting used to the social construct of the city. That definitely needs more space. Even in London now, you know, because the shops have queues outside. A lot of the main roads have an area taken off the car thoroughway and handed it to the pavement, and pavements are wider. It works really well. It's lovely, you know. You have no more parked cars. There's no space, and everybody happy, and that's going to stay. That's not going to, you know, that's what we're going to do. And I think it's a cool idea. Cars, the same thing, you know. We shouldn't all have our own car and drive around. We should share them, and optimized cars will make that possible. So you know, there's a massive opportunity, there's business opportunity, there are reasons to do it. It'll all fall into place almost automatically. I think we've made the most important and the most difficult start to this process of getting ready for survival of the 21st century.
I like what you said about doubling and tripling use of space, Ron. I think the answer to that question very much depends on where you are, which city. I mean, Spark works a lot in China and in Singapore, and very much so the repurposing and regeneration of city centers is a top-down process. Depends very much on the legislation. And last year, coincidentally, in Singapore, the new URA master plan, which is our urban regeneration bureau, it's aimed at changing the monocultural nature of the CBD. So, you know, converting dysfunctional, underused office buildings and shopping malls into new functions, community, bringing residential into the CBD, so it's not like dead town on weekends.
Yeah, great. Well, actually, you mentioned in your presentation, Wenhui, the retrofit, and everyone talks about, and typically it's the three R's of reduce, reuse, recycle, and I guess there's the fourth one, which is refuse. But I guess the fifth one would be retrofit. So I think it's very timely.
Mhm.
We've obviously seen, what Ron, you were touching on in terms of repurposing and reusing and retrofitting. We've kind of seen this already, I guess, in other areas, and now it's probably entering into the public spaces and city space. So we've seen it with cars through Uber and Grab and other car share type of organizations. And I guess in hospitality, we've seen it, Airbnb being a prime example. And I wonder if that is going to extend into workplace and other types of spaces. So I definitely think we're going to be seeing more and more of this trend. And I think it makes sense as we plow ahead. We have to be smarter about the resources we have. And I think everyone's very acutely aware of the impact to the planet that we are having. So I think there is this definitely this groundswell of intention and desire to be more responsible and sustainable about how we use the resources we have. I'm just going to move on to the next question. With so many towns and cities in Asia densely populated, especially in ASEAN capitals like Manila and Jakarta, do you think sustainable design has room in these urban areas? How would a project like the Edge, Ron Bakker's Treehouse be implemented in these locations? So I guess, Ron, you'd probably be the best one to maybe tackle this first, and then maybe we can see if anybody has anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the bigger idea in Treehouse is the mixing of functions, which has started in Asia much more easily than it has in Europe. There, most buildings that are built in cities are mono-functional. Perhaps a few shops, on the ground floor, because the cities insist, because they get active street life, they call it. But there's nothing like the sort of filtering up of public space into buildings to higher levels, as we see it in many Asian cities and in the Middle East. And I think it's really cool, and it's very definitely part of the big idea that densely populated cities will have to be designed along. Well, in really densely occupied cities, of course, construction is quite debilitating often. Transport of concrete in cities is terrible. The noise associated with construction and the dust and the pollution and not talking about the aesthetics of a building site for sometimes 3 or 4 years. So if you look at wood, and it's actually a lot lighter, of course, than other materials. So you can make very large elements and truck them in, and reassemble them on site. So the idea of prefabrication that we've gone through, every 15 years in the last half century at least, maybe a bit longer, is coming back with a vengeance. It makes sense to build buildings outside of cities. And then truck them in. If they're built out of timber, the amount of truck movements is about 20% compared to a steel or concrete building. So there's a lot of industrial design kind of approach to architecture that's coming back again, which is very interesting. Plus, if you build things in factory conditions and you can combine much more sophisticated techniques to make parts of buildings, that makes a lot of sense. So, in the same sentence, I've talked about public experience and about democracy and about sustainability and about truck movements and about sustainable materials, all in the one sentence. We do this all the time. All these things overlap.
If I may just add to that, I think Indonesia and the Philippines are both great sources of timber, ideally suited to developing engineered timber fabrication plants. The issue is, again, about legislation and cost. Engineered timber is expensive in Southeast Asia and does not meet a lot of local criteria. I'm talking about fire, structure engineering for high-rise buildings, and of course termites, the climate here. But importantly, land costs. In Singapore, land is so expensive, you need to build high to fund the land purchase. So timber construction, I think it was very positive, Ron, that you said earlier, it can now be engineered to 300 meters.
And
right.
There's no structural issue that stops it. You know, it's very the only thing we ran into is that because it's so light, the timber, are two main issues. One is that your sections get bigger. So, you know, the tower that we designed, the 300-meter tower we designed in the center of London, which is a theoretical project, I must ask. Some people ask me if they can come on a site visit, but it's not quite a reality yet. But the columns are 2.5 meters square, you know, they stand firmly in the public realm. Because they're wood, people don't mind them so much, is my guess, but the sections are bigger. The other issue we found, you know, tall buildings, the gravity is not so much of a problem in tall buildings, but the wind force is what generates the forces in the structure. And the wood has, because it's so light, has much less inertia, and the tops of the towers tend to flap in the wind, you know, which is a bit of a comfort issue. Not so much a structural issue, but it's very unpleasant to be swung around, you know, at increasing G forces in a storm. So so we're finding that we need to deal with that in a different way. So in terms of tall building structural engineering, there are challenges too, and they're not difficult to overcome. They just need work. But I agree, the regulatory environment around it is young and needs a lot of research and a lot of testing, and we haven't found anything that cannot be overcome. But we haven't thought of the termites, I must admit. We don't get very many in the European cities.
Can I just add that I completely appreciate the importance of, you know, new methods of timber construction. And in Sweden, we were looking at a project that is kind of humble in nature compared to yours, Ron. I mean, it was only 18 stories, and it was supposedly going to be the tallest timber structure in Sweden. But the biggest issue was the real estate. Yeah, the thickness of the walls and the structure would have actually, you know, outweighed the ability to actually create the thing, because the units would be too small, or they'd be selling for quite a high cost per apartment. So that was something that needed to also be sort of factored in. And eventually, it wasn't a completely CLT structure. It became a hybrid between a concrete core and then the outer components were actually CLT. But back to the point about Indonesia and Philippines, two high-density cities with high-rise structures that are having glass, steel, and concrete as these ubiquitous Western structures. I think it's also about injecting open space into these at height to reduce perceived density. And I think the incorporation of sky courts, sky gardens as alternative social spaces can then provide an opportunity for a new life, new trees and greenery to be injected into the city. That similarly has the ability to try and reduce ambient temperatures, absorb excess rainwater, take out those noxious pollutants from the atmosphere and act as a carbon sponge, which I think works hand in hand with trying to make the city greener.
Right. Super fascinating. There's a lot of talk about smart cities, smart nations, smart cities, and by extension, smart buildings. I kind of wonder, from your point of view, what are some of the mistakes that cities make when designing their cities with regards to smart cities and smart buildings?
Well, I mean, it's that kind of age-old thing, isn't it? Everybody thinks that a smart city is about kind of talking fridges and autonomous cars and, you know, Big Brother acting as, sort of big data acting as the sort of Big Brother. But I think we need to go beyond the technology. I have to say, I did actually walk around Ron's building, The Edge in Amsterdam, when I was actually filming the Smart City series, and I absolutely loved it, but it wasn't necessarily just for the technology. It was about the whole environment, the experience that one has, whether it's actually somebody remembering the cup of coffee that you like, which is sort of an automated experience, or whether the building remembers the temperature setting or the light levels that I want to enjoy for my average working day. So I think we need to be careful that the technology doesn't overtake us, but it sort of enhances our lives. And the other thing I would say is that when we think about the technology, that's only just one part of it. It's also about the culture of the place. And it's also about listening to the people and what they need out of their city. And when I look at smart cities like Bandung, for instance, I think it's a classic example of where the technology is the enabler. Now, in the former mayor of Bandung, Ridwan Kamil, he basically turned around to his constituents and said, okay, tell me what you need from the city and we'll try and improve it. And he invited his 1.2 million Facebook and Twitter followers to kind of tweet in what their major gripes were about the city. And basically his digital command center was able to sift through those trending topics relating to congestion, pollution, crime. And what that demonstrated was a very sensible way of kind of using the technology to kind of hear the voices of the people and then assign the resources wisely to fix those issues. So my view is that we need to use the technology wisely, put it into the hands of the individual, from the 7-year-old child through to the 70-year-old grandparent, and hopefully those decisions are being people-driven as opposed to government-driven.
Wonderful. And I think if you sort of extrapolate, if you're positive about innovation and technology and you think it can eventually resolve the real troublesome issues that we are dealing with, and you just mentioned a few, you know, pollution and congestion and crime and unhealthy situations, and I'm very positive that if we focus on that for 20 years, we will have solved most of those. But you know, we have almost forgotten that the idea of happiness. You know, if happiness should really be the greatest good, once we've resolved, you know, natural disasters and the terrible things we do to the planet. If you could, it's to do with communication. The example you use, Jason, is quite wonderful. And if you ask many people, you'll get a lot of it will be about the issues that are in the newspapers every day. But there'll also be a general undertone or learning to be had from this idea that, you know, there is more to life than solving disasters. You know, there's also a pursuit to better happiness. And we talk about it, and it's to do with art, and it's to do with beauty. So in buildings, it's easier because it's to do with lighting conditions and acoustics and social structures. But in cities, it's tough. And a lot of people love cities because they're beautiful, you know, and beautiful places to be. And we are all designers. We kind of understand how to talk about these types of spatial beauty. But it's not an easy thing to convey to people.
Very true.
Just conscious of time, I'm afraid we probably only have time for one more question. So I'll pose the question, and then what I'd like to ask the panel is to, if you have any sort of final or closing remarks to make, and then I'll do the wrap up. So the last question I'll pose to the panel will be, since the pandemic, more business owners have become aware of their environmental footprint. Do you think this mindset will change once we have recovered, or do you think we will push the climate issue back to the back burner like we did with past crises? How can we move forward with the green agenda in this industry?
I think the architecture and building industry is a leviathan that takes a long time to change. It's not the fashion industry. So we don't believe that there will be much change once we develop a vaccine for COVID-19. I mean, office workers are now used to the Google-esque environment. This is a social generation, virtually and physically. I mean, we like to talk about this a lot and intellectualize the issue. But China is back at work. it's business as usual. I think that you know, there will be healing in phases, and gradually things will be back to normal.
Yeah, and there is the likelihood that things will flip straight back into our bad habits, but we are learning bits, and things change not quickly ever. You know, things change slowly, and we are learning. One sign that we are trying to deal with at the moment in European cities is that people have actually understood the qualities of not having to go to the office every day, and they're spending more time with their families. They actually, you know, if you don't commute 3 hours a day, you have 3 hours to read a book or play your violin. You know, it's a real increase of life quality. And I think we will figure out ways of bringing that into how we deal with office space. Remember, the Edge has workspace for 3,000 people, but actually there are only 1,000 workspaces. And the reason that works is because people are flexible with their choice of workspace, and the smart systems help people organize this process. And if you think of the potential that people might figure out how to do some of their work at home and some of the work in the office, because there are different parts to their work, different for every industry, and it's never going to work for everybody. But that gives you the potential to reduce traffic, pollution, to make people happier, to make people healthier. All these things can be done in a very smart way. And I think we will work out in the next few years how to benefit from what we've learned.
I mean, for me, it's I'm constantly hearing this term "new normal," and it drives me absolutely insane. But the simple fact of the matter is that maybe balance is the new normal. And I think that, let me give you an example. When I watched Mad Men, I was a big fan of that kind of show about kind of the advertising industry in Manhattan in the 1950s. And there's this wonderful scene where Don Draper and his family are throwing the rubbish out of the window of their car. And I think that not many people nowadays would be willing to do that for fear of being remonstrated and sort of complained at by various people. And I think that it's taken about 50 years for people to be realizing, oh, I'm not going to be throwing my rubbish out the window. I think that there's going to be this element of education here, where we just need to be kind of constantly reminding people of the way that we are going to be living different lives. And I think, and I'm hoping that this period that we're facing now, which has effectively forced us to recalibrate and think again about the way that we live, work, and play and learn, some of those lessons are going to rub off. I mean, working from home, working in the office, a balance between those sort of scenarios. Not necessarily taking the 3-day business trip, but maybe only going on that business trip that really matters. The holiday that is the kind of the city break might actually be more of a immersive 1-week experience. So I think it's about trying to find the balance.
That's great, Jason. That's very Yoda-like Star Wars of you. Balance is the new normal. I love it. Yeah, I think there's going to be some element of, I think, as we all know and hope, by all indications, there should be a vaccine, hopefully mid next year, end of next year. So certain things I see will return to normal, but I think there are some longer term, more fundamental things which will stay with us a bit longer. And I think one of those things will be companies' attitude and towards real estate requirements. So whereby a company may have taken up 3 floors in an office building, maybe they'll just need 1, maybe 2, maybe 1.5. What does that mean? What impact will that have to developers and landlords? How will that space be repurposed and reused? I do think that us as individuals, we're all overall, generally speaking, smart, intelligent individuals, but collectively as a group, we've shown that we're, herd mentality, and if left to our own devices, things don't happen. So, yeah, I think like everyone on the panel, I'm cautiously optimistic. So I think that takes us up to 5 o'clock. Well, in Singapore time, obviously the time's slightly different in Bangkok. So I would like to ask if there's if any of the speakers would like to just leave us with any final thoughts before I do the wrap up.
I would say be positive, you know, be positive. We are, times are tough, but we're learning rapidly and we communicate much better than we have. We collaborate with people who will do very different things. It's an important thing.
Yeah.
I think it's about the shifting of attitude to the ideas behind retro first. Reuse rather than discard, retrofit rather than demolition rebuild.
And I guess for me, it's about trying to find that new balance and ultimately moving beyond the triple bottom line and realizing that culture, space, and technology will have a huge part to play on the way that we start shaping our new cities.
And one more thing.
Fantastic.
Happy Dragon Boat Festival today.
Yes.
Yes, Dune Festival. Yes. Thank you very much. So before we go, I just want to say thank you to our speakers once again. Jason, Yoda, Pomeroy, thank you very much. Balance is the new normal. I love it. Wen Hui, Retrofit, the fifth R, fantastic. Ron. Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us on the live webinar today from wherever you're calling in from. Please feel free to send any inquiries you have to the email on the screen and stay connected to the Property Guru Asia Real Estate Summit social media channels. A link with the recorded webinar and the presentation slides will be uploaded to the official website, which is asiarealestatesummit.com. The next Property Guru Asia Real Estate Summit will take place in Bangkok on Thursday, the 3rd of December, 2020, with the theme of Spirit of Innovation, where we'll be discussing green technology, sustainability, and the new economy. We look forward to seeing you there. Once again, on behalf of Property Guru Asia Real Estate Summit team, we thank you and we'll see you at our next live webinar. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.
Bye-bye.